For 500 years, the richest families discovered something most people never understood about money. They didn't simply earn fortunes. They built systems designed to keep those fortunes alive. Wars destroyed kingdoms, markets collapsed, and empires disappeared, yet their wealth continued moving forward.
They understood that money was only powerful when it could produce more money.
The wealthy rarely treated profit as money to spend. They treated it as capital to reinvest. Instead of chasing quick riches, they built agreements designed to generate income repeatedly. Their money traveled through ships, warehouses, markets, and businesses across distant lands. One successful trade created profit, but repeated trades transformed profit into lasting wealth. And that was the secret. They built systems their descendants could inherit, not fortunes they had to rebuild. Over time, wealthy families stopped thinking like individuals and started thinking like institutions.
Their greatest advantage was not simply money, but knowledge transferred from one generation to another.
They accumulated productive assets that could continue generating income long after the original investment.
Markets collapsed, wars erupted, and fortunes disappeared, but diversified wealth could survive the storm. They were not playing for one lucky year. They were playing a game that lasted generations. Every generation had a choice: consume the profits or put those profits back to work. Those who reinvested gradually transformed small fortunes into enormous collections of productive assets.
Then the Industrial Revolution created opportunities that previous generations could never have imagined.
The wealthy increasingly sought ownership itself, rather than simply earning wages from someone else's enterprise. The technology changed, the markets changed, but the fundamental strategy remained remarkably similar.
But wealth was never guaranteed. Every century brought crashes that destroyed unprepared fortunes.
The families who survived kept reserves, allowing them to endure when markets and businesses suddenly collapsed.
And when others were desperate to sell, patient investors sometimes found their greatest opportunities.
The next generation inherited more than assets. They inherited a system built through centuries of experience. 500 years later, the lesson remained simple. Wealth survives when its owners think beyond themselves. But the greatest advantage was never the money itself. It was knowing how money worked. They learned markets, contracts, trade, taxes, and risk before committing their capital. They also built relationships with merchants, bankers, governments, and other powerful families.
Those relationships gave them information and opportunities unavailable to ordinary people.
Their real fortune was an invisible fortress built from knowledge, relationships, ownership, and time.
By the 20th century, the old principles had simply found new forms.
The wealthy increasingly focused on owning businesses, property, and investments that could compound.
Time became their greatest ally, because compounding rewards patience more than excitement.
A fortune built carefully could outlive its creator and continue growing through generations. So the real question is not how they became rich, but why they refused to stop building. For them, money was never idle. Every asset had a purpose, producing income or preserving value. Before seeking greater returns, they understood the importance of protecting what they already possessed. Their wealth rarely depended on one source, because one source could disappear overnight. When another crisis arrived, diversified assets gave them something most people lacked: options. Across 500 years, the details changed, but the principle never did. Preserve, reinvest, and wait.
Keeping wealth required discipline because every generation faced the temptation to spend it.
The greatest danger was sometimes not the market, but an heir who misunderstood the system.
A fortune could disappear quickly when consumption replaced ownership and patience.
Those who preserved their fortunes kept acquiring assets capable of surviving changing economies.
And after centuries of change, one truth remained. Wealth lasts when the system lasts longer than its owner.
A new century arrived, bringing faster markets, larger companies, and entirely new ways to build wealth.
The family fortune could now move beyond farms and ships into growing corporations and industries.
Instead of consuming every dividend, disciplined investors redirected part of it back into productive assets.
One generation planted the capital, another expanded it, and the next inherited something even more valuable.
Their greatest advantage was not a secret investment, but having decades for small advantages to become enormous.
Today, the buildings are different, but the fundamental game of wealth remains surprisingly familiar.
Wealth shifted from coins and ships toward businesses, property, shares, and productive investments. The longer productive assets remained invested, the more powerful their accumulated growth became.
The secret was never simply making money. It was building a system capable of making money for generations.
Behind every lasting fortune was an engine designed to keep capital moving forward.
Land, businesses, and trade could generate cash flow without requiring constant personal labor.
Those earnings could then be redirected into new opportunities, creating another layer of growth.
Small gains became larger gains when each generation allowed the process to continue. That is why 500 years can transform modest capital into wealth powerful enough to survive history itself.
To stay rich for 500 years, wealth demands sacrifice. It requires relentless focus and a deep understanding of capital. They learned to delay pleasure today so their capital could create greater opportunities tomorrow. They also understood that inherited money meant little without inherited financial discipline.
The goal was not simply to become rich, but to prevent one generation from destroying what many had built.
Because lasting wealth is ultimately a legacy of decisions repeated long after the originator fortune is gone. The biggest difference was not always how much they earned, but what they did with what remained.
Instead of depending entirely on labor income, they accumulated ownership in productive assets. Then they gave those assets something most investors underestimate: enough time to compound.
Each generation added another link, making the financial chain stronger than any single lifetime. So how did the rich stay rich for 500 years? They learned to think beyond one lifetime.
Their greatest investment was often designed for people they would never live long enough to meet.
They built foundations strong enough to support wealth through wars, crashes, and changing political systems.
When panic spread through markets, long-term owners could focus on survival instead of immediate speculation.
And when prices fell, preserved capital gave them the ability to buy what others could no longer afford. Protect capital, acquire assets, reinvest profits, and repeat the cycle for generations. Every generation still faces the same choice: consume the wealth or use it to create more. What begins slowly can become extraordinary when patience, ownership, and reinvestment continue for decades. The rich did not discover a magic formula. They discovered how to let time work relentlessly in their favor.